In 2024, Alabama resumed executions using a new method, nitrogen hypoxia. Officials said it was a humane alternative to the lethal injection, which had multiple botched executions in the past. However, what was promised as a quick, painless death was not the reality. The reality left witnesses horrified. The execution method appears straightforward. The condemned individual is strapped to a gurney and made to inhale pure nitrogen, effectively cutting off their oxygen supply until death comes about. Alabama's Department of Corrections states that the death would occur almost immediately, yet during the executions of Kenneth Smith and Alan Miller, witnesses shared a completely different experience. Both men thrashed violently for several minutes, visibly gasping for air before finally dying. Alan Miller's last moments were described as agonizing to watch. A similar horror unfolded during Kerry Grayson's execution, where he remained conscious and struggled to breathe for over 6 minutes. For witnesses, it was clear that this was not the painless and humane process that was promised. It was state-sanctioned terror. Despite these realities, Alabama maintains that nitrogen hypoxia is the best alternative to lethal injection, even though the method didn't even go through proper testing prior to being used on Kenneth Smith. People believe that this new execution method violates the 8th Amendment right that prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Now, advocates are calling for Alabama to halt all executions and permanently ban the use of nitrogen during executions. What's particularly concerning is that Alabama has had a lack of transparency about its execution procedures. After pausing executions due to repeated failures with lethal injection, the Alabama Department of Corrections pledged to investigate. However, when executions resumed in 2024, no findings from that investigation were even made public. What's particularly concerning is Alabama's lack of transparency about its execution procedures. After pausing executions due to repeated failures with the lethal injection, the Alabama Department of Corrections pledged to investigate. However, when executions resumed in 2024, no findings from that investigation were ever made public. Requests for transparency have gone completely unanswered. According to sources, the next execution is scheduled to take place February 6. People aren't test dummies. Alabama should stay executions and launch an independent and transparent investigation into the use of nitrogen for executions. Justice demands transparency, not secrecy. I don't think TikTok is going anywhere on the 19th. And before you get upset, please just understand.
It's my opinion!
I might be wrong, and I've been wrong before, and you know that if you knew my dating history before Mr. Black Belt, but I'm okay with being wrong. Here's what I think will happen. I believe the Supreme Court will grant or issue a stay. That means they'll pause any immediate action and take more time to decide. Why? To give themselves more time to review everything and maybe even let Trump, who filed an amicus brief, negotiate a way to keep TikTok up and running. I'm saying this because I listened to all of the oral arguments, and here's what I noticed. The justices asked tough questions on both sides, and guess what? That is normal. But the government's arguments had some serious weak spots that were exposed. One example is when Justice Thomas asked, is there any difference between content manipulation by a non-US company versus a US company? And guess what? The government struggled to give a good answer. So Thomas asked again, what difference does it make? Justice Kagan even added, well, if covert just means people don't know China is behind it, everybody knows now. She didn't see how covert really strengthened the government's case. Justice Gorsuch had a really funny exchange about this. When the government alluded that Americans wouldn't understand a possible black box or TikTok disclaimer about possible manipulation, Gore shot back and said that your best argument is that Americans won't realize that their TikTok cat videos may be manipulated. He also called the government's overall argument paternalistic. He said it sounded like the government believes that Americans need to be protected because they cannot think practically for themselves. That didn't sit right with him. And if you listen to it, he was getting them. Even Chief Justice Roberts made a joke when asking if TikTok is being used to make Americans argue. He said, if they are, I'd say that they're winning. Then there was a moment where Justice Kagan said that the government gave their entire argument away, specifically about covert manipulation. She compared the case to the Communist Party in the 1950s and how Congress didn't like its Soviet ties. She pointed out that this TikTok case is also about controlling content, which then triggers free speech protections. She said, you're saying the content might be manipulated, but that's a content-based issue, isn't it? Justice Alito also questioned the government's logic and asked, isn't this like saying we'll shut someone up just because we don't like them without knowing what they'll even say? Gorsuch agreed, saying he struggled to see how this wasn't a content-based restriction. Another question that came up was the question of fairness. Chief Justice Roberts pointed out that the government gets to see all of this so-called evidence about covert manipulation, but TikTok's lawyers don't. He said, that doesn't seem fair, does it? Even Justice Jackson and Justice Barrett questioned the government's arguments about content and data. Jackson said that she still doesn't see how this wasn't about content control. Barrett asked if if shutting down TikTok would still be speaker-based discrimination or not. Finally, Justice Kavanaugh asked about how the government's two reasons, data collection and content manipulation, even fit together. He said that the data argument seems strong, but the content argument is harder to prove. So, long story short, the justices seem unconvinced by the government's case, and they may need more time to look over all of the information prior to making a ruling. With the ban set to take place in 7 days, it is expected that the justices will rule relatively quickly. Either way, I am of the opinion that TikTok isn't going anywhere. Is this prediction delusional and out of pocket? Perhaps, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. There's still no decision on the future of TikTok, and as of today, January 13, 2025, the Supreme Court has yet to announce whether they will uphold, strike down, or issue a stay on the upcoming TikTok ban that's set to take effect next week. According to SCOTUS blog, which tracks Supreme Court cases, opinions, and the court's calendar, arguments for the two TikTok cases concluded on January 10, 2025. As of now, the opinions for both cases remain listed as to be determined. On Monday's calendar, the court heard two unrelated cases and released an order list in the morning, which included nothing about the TikTok ban. However, it's important to note that the Supreme Court can issue additional miscellaneous orders at any time. Tuesday's calendar includes two oral arguments unrelated to the TikTok ban. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting. So Wednesday's calendar lists a single argument hearing followed by an opinion section. At this point, it's unclear what the Supreme Court will announce on Wednesday, but many are hopeful that Wednesday's opinion could be related to the impending TikTok ban. In my last video, I shared my personal opinion. I believe the Supreme Court will issue a stay to temporarily block the law. Again, that's just my opinion. There's still a chance they could uphold the ban, meaning TikTok as we know it today may cease to exist after January 19th. Only time will tell, but stay tuned and I'll bring you more updates as soon as new information becomes available.